Have you ever felt hunger? Not for food, but for love? That kind of hunger that eats you from the inside, that makes your chest heavy and turns silence louder than any word? I have. And maybe that's why you're here today. Because deep down, this story isn't just mine. It belongs to every mother who once gave everything she had, only to be forgotten. I never thought there would come a day when the empty plate in front of me would taste like the absence of my own daughter. I spent my whole life caring for her, feeding her, protecting her, doing the impossible so that she would never lack anything. And one day, when all I needed was a simple gesture, a memory, what I found was silence. A silence that hurt more than any cruel word. It wasn't hunger for bread. It was hunger for affection, for presence, for being remembered. There are pains that you don't scream out. You swallow them with a sip of dignity. The pain of a forgotten mother is one of them. And it's strange how life works. Because the same woman who once fed her child's body can end up begging for crumbs of attention from that very child. And no one really understands what that does to a woman's heart. When you're a mother, you believe the love you give will be enough to protect your child from everything. But no one warns you that time changes people, that the love of yesterday can turn into distance. That's when silence starts to live inside your home, and before you realize it, inside your soul. I remember, the first time I noticed something was wrong. The table that used to be filled with laughter now only had the ticking of the clock and the clinking of a lonely spoon, and I pretended not to notice. Because mothers have that gift, pretending it doesn't hurt, just to avoid pushing their children even further away. But the truth is, every lonely meal was a reminder that I had been left behind. The hardest part wasn't the empty plate, it was the empty heart. Hunger fades, but abandonment stays. Abandonment doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in quietly, sits beside you, and convinces you that you deserved more. And then you start wondering where it all went wrong, what you didn't do. What word, what moment, what look changed everything. But no matter how much I search for answers, all I'm left with is the memory of the love I gave. A love that, for a while, seemed strong enough for two. Today, as I tell you this story, I want you to listen with your heart. Because this isn't just the story of an old woman sitting at an empty table. It's the story of countless women who once were the nourishment, the shelter, the home, and are now forgotten memories within their own families. And maybe you too have tasted that bitter feeling. The feeling of giving everything and still ending up with nothing. That's what we're going to talk about today. About the pain that can't be seen, but is felt in silence. About the love that survives even when it's not returned. And about the moment when a mother learns that even hunger can teach lessons. Don't leave just yet. This story will change how you see what truly feeds a soul. And maybe, by the end, you'll realize that silence also has a voice. I can still remember the smell of beans simmering on the stove, the sound of rain tapping on the roof, and her laughter echoing through the yard as she ran barefoot. She was full of life, her hair wild, her eyes curious, always tugging on my skirt, calling, "Mama," asking to be held. I didn't have much to give, but what I had, I shared with love. The rice was simple, the bread was scarce, but affection, that was endless. The table may have been small, but the love surrounding it was big enough to hold an entire world. I remember every morning I woke before sunrise to make breakfast, even when I was tired, even when I was sick. Everything I did was for her. I believed that if I cared with my whole heart, she would never go without. I fooled myself into thinking a mother's love could protect from everything. We raise our children believing sacrifice is the price of love. And maybe it is, because I gave what I had and what I didn't, and I'd do it all again if I had to. There were days when the money barely stretched enough for bread, yet I still smiled and invented stories to turn not enough into plenty. She'd look at me with those bright, believing eyes and say, "Mom, you're the strongest woman in the world." And I believed her, not because I felt strong, but because I had no other choice. I worked all day, and even when my body begged for rest, my heart wouldn't let me stop. At night, as she slept, I'd watch her and think, it's worth it. Every callus, every hidden tear, every sacrifice, it was all worth it. Because I knew she'd have a better life. I dreamed of her future like someone praying for a miracle. But time passes, and life changes people. What once was laughter turned into distance. That little girl who used to beg me to play dolls started drifting away. The talks grew shorter, the affection colder, and the love I poured out began to return as indifference. It's strange when a person's gaze changes. First, you try not to see it. Then, you try to explain it away. In the end, all that's left is silence. Sometimes I catch myself going back to those memories, trying to find where things began to slip away. Maybe it was when she decided I didn't understand her world anymore. Maybe it was when I started aging and she began to see me not as her mother, but as a burden. It hurts to admit it, but love changes shape, and when it doesn't always warn you. Her childhood was the most beautiful chapter of my life, and maybe that's why the contrast with the present hurts so much. Now, when I look at the empty table, it's as if every laugh we ever shared still echoes in the walls, reminding me that there was once a time when love and food never ran out here. Now, everything is gone, except the memory. I remember one night in particular. She must have been about 8 years old. It was cold, and I didn't have money for gas. I cooked on a wood stove, and as I stirred the pot, she sat beside me and said, "Mom, food smells better when it's cooked with love, doesn't it?" I smiled and said yes. In that moment, the world stopped. It was just us, the crackle of fire and the taste of simplicity. That was happiness, even in poverty. And maybe that's what hurts most now, remembering that her love was built on every sacrifice I made. And yet one day, she turned her back on me. It's as if the memory of who we were both nourishes and tortures me. I lived for her, and now I live off the memories she left behind. When a mother raises a child alone, she learns to talk to God every day, because only He understands the weight of wanting everything good for someone who might never see it. I asked God for strength, and He gave it. I asked Him for patience, and He gave that too. But I forgot to ask that her love never grow cold. Maybe that was my mistake. I remember the first gift she ever gave me, a drawing made with colored pencils, full of uneven hearts and shaky letters that said, "I love you, Mom." I still have that paper, yellowed with time but rich with meaning. Every time I look at it, I wonder where that little girl went. Where did that innocent love go? The one that once saw me as her whole world. And if you've ever lived something like this, type in the comments, "I know what that feels like." Because this pain is old. It lives in many mothers who gave everything and ended up with nothing. It's a silent pain, one that time doesn't erase, only teaches you how to carry. And still, no matter how much it hurts, I can't think of her without love. Because even when her love failed me, mine never stopped existing. A mother doesn't turn off her feelings, doesn't forget, doesn't replace. A mother simply learns to love differently, from afar, in silence. Today, when I think about the past, I realize that what once united us was stronger than any difference. But time, resentment, and pride, they build invisible walls between hearts that once beat in the same rhythm. And it's on those walls that longing rests. But life has its turns, and sometimes the same love that was lost is the one that teaches us how to forgive later. I don't know what the future holds for me and her, but I do know that every story between a mother and daughter has chapters that only time can rewrite. So, if you're listening to me right now, stay with me until the end, because this story still has so much to tell, and what happens next might change the way you see love, pain, and even faith itself, because in the end, even silence carries memories. And it's within that silence that the next part of my story begins. I can still remember the smell of beans simmering on the stove, the sound of rain hitting the roof, and her laughter as she ran barefoot through the yard. She was full of life, with loose hair and curious eyes, always tugging at my skirt, calling me Mama, asking to be held. I didn't have much to give, but what I had, I shared with love. The rice was simple, the bread was counted, but affection was always abundant. The table may have been small, but the love around it was big enough to hold an entire world. I remember every morning I woke before sunrise to make breakfast, even when I was tired, even when I was sick. Everything I did was for her. I believed that if I cared with my heart, she would never go without. I was naive enough to think that a mother's love could protect against everything. We raise our children believing that sacrifice is the price of love. And maybe it is, because I gave everything I had, and even what I didn't. and I'd do it all again if I had to. There were days when the money barely covered bread, and yet I still smiled and told her stories to turn the little we had into a celebration. She'd look at me with those eyes full of faith and say, "Mom, you're the strongest woman in the world." And I believed her, not because I felt strong, but because I had no other choice. I worked all day, and even when my body begged for rest, my heart refused to stop. At night, as she slept, I would watch her and think, it's worth it. Every callous, every hidden tear, every renunciation, all of it was worth it. Because I knew she would have a better life. I dreamed of her future the way someone prays for a miracle. But time moves on, and life changes people. What once was laughter turned into distance. That little girl who begged me to play dolls started to drift away. The conversations became shorter, the affection rarer, and the love I poured out began to be returned with indifference. It's strange when you realize the way someone's eyes on you have changed. At first, you try not to see it. Then you try to justify it. And in the end, there's only silence. Sometimes I find myself going back to those memories, trying to figure out where things began to fall apart. Maybe it was when she started thinking I no longer understood her world. Maybe when I started getting older, and she began to see me as a weight, not a mother. It's painful to admit, but love can change its shape. And when it does, it doesn't always warn you. Her childhood was the most beautiful chapter of my life, and maybe that's why the contrast with today hurts so much. Now, when I look at the empty table, it's as if every sound of laughter echoes through the walls, reminding me that there was once a time when love and food never ran out here. Now everything is missing, except the memory. I remember one night in particular. She must have been around 8 years old. It was cold, and I didn't have money for gas. I cooked over a wood fire, and as I stirred the pot, she sat beside me and said, "Mom, food smells better when it's made with love, doesn't it?" I smiled and said yes. In that moment, the world stopped. It was just us, the sound of the fire and the taste of simplicity. That was happiness, even in poverty. And maybe that's what hurts most now, remembering that her love was built on every sacrifice I made, and yet one day she chose to turn her back. It's as if the memory of what we were both nourishes me and tortures me at the same time. I lived for her, and now I live off the memories she left behind. When a mother raises a child alone, she learns to talk to God every day, because only He understands the weight of wanting everything good for someone who might never recognize it. I asked God to give me strength, and He did. I asked Him for patience, and He gave that too. But I forgot to ask that her love never grow cold. Maybe that was my mistake. I remember the first gift she ever gave me, a drawing made with colored pencils, full of crooked hearts and shaky letters that said, "I love you, Mommy." I still have that piece of paper, yellowed with time, but full of meaning. Every time I look at it, I ask myself where that little girl went. Where did that innocent love go, the one that once believed I was her whole world? And if you've ever felt something like this, write in the comments, "I know what that feels like," because this pain is ancient, and it lives inside so many mothers who gave everything and were left with nothing. It's a silent kind of pain, the kind that time doesn't erase, only teaches you how to carry. And still, no matter how much it hurts, I can't think of her without love. Because even when her love failed me, mine never stopped existing. A mother doesn't turn off her feelings, doesn't forget, doesn't replace. A mother simply learns to love differently, from afar, in silence. Today, when I think about the past, I realize that what once united us was stronger than any difference, but time, resentment, and pride. They build invisible walls between hearts that once beat in the same rhythm, and it's on those walls that longing rests. But life has its turns, and sometimes the same love that was lost is the one that teaches us how to forgive later. I don't know what the future holds for me and her, but I do know that every story between a mother and daughter has chapters that only time can rewrite. So, if you're listening to me right now, stay with me until the end, because this story still has so much to tell, and what happens next might change the way you see love, pain, and even faith itself. Because, in the end, even silence carries memories. And it's within that silence that the next part of my story begins. When love starts to grow cold, it doesn't warn you. It arrives slowly, like a soft wind that first bends the flowers before pulling up the roots. And that's how the silence began between me and my daughter. At first, it was just small gestures, a glance that turned away, a short answer, a rushed visit. Things any mother tries to justify. She's just busy, she's tired, life's hard right now. I told myself that, repeated it like a prayer to keep believing. But deep down, I already knew. Something had changed. She grew up, she went out into the world, and somehow, along the way, she lost me. I watched from a distance, trying to understand where the little girl who ran into my arms had gone. Now she walked past me and barely met my eyes. The word mom that once came wrapped in sweetness now sounded like obligation. I tried to reach out, but every attempt turned into irritation. And I learned in the hardest way that even love has limited space when the other person starts to pull away. The days grew longer and the silence heavier. I still woke up early, as I always had, made coffee, and let the smell of warm bread fill the house, as if that simple scent could remind her of the mornings we once shared. But her chair at the table started to stay empty. Sometimes I'd hear the gate closing. She was leaving in a hurry, without saying goodbye. I would stand there in the kitchen, holding my cup, trying to understand when love turned into haste. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong. Did I love her too much? Did I protect her too much? Can love smother when it's whole? I never knew how to hold back. I always believed that caring was the most beautiful form of love. But suddenly, I realized that what to me was care might have felt like a burden to her. And that hurt more than any angry word could. Because a mother's love doesn't understand limits. It overflows. And sometimes, what overflows can drown. There were nights when I stayed awake, listening for the sound of the key in the door. And when she came home, she barely greeted me before locking herself in her room, lost in a world I no longer knew. Our long talks turned into one-word exchanges. Hey, yeah, later. 3 words that echoed louder than silence itself. I tried to tell myself it was just a phase, but time proved me wrong. The house that once breathed life began to lose its sound. Even the ticking of the clock seemed slower. And the saddest part was that loneliness didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, filling the empty spaces between us, taking the place of what once were memories. I watched my daughter change before my eyes, and the more I tried to reach her, the further she drifted away. It's a pain only those who've been left by someone who's still around can truly understand. I started to speak less, maybe out of fear that any word might push her even further away. I began to move quietly around the house, not wanting to disturb. I cooked only enough for one, as if leftovers would be too painful. It's strange how love teaches you to shrink. You make yourself smaller to fit into the other person's life until you almost disappear. And one day, you look around and realize you don't even know where you went. The little gestures that once came naturally vanished. The goodnight hug became a distant memory. And I, who once had the gift of making a home feel warm, became a visitor in my own daughter's life. I tried to hide the sadness, but every gesture of hers reminded me that love, when it's no longer nourished, also goes hungry. I watched the light in her eyes change, the tone of her voice lose its tenderness. There were days she looked at me the way someone looks at an old photograph, with respect, but without emotion. It was as if I had become part of her past, someone who existed but no longer fit into her present. And the guilt, oh, that cruel companion. That takes root in every mother's heart. I carried it with me every single day, searching for the moment where I went wrong. Maybe I was too strict when she was a teenager. Maybe I said no when she needed a yes. Maybe I pushed too hard, out of fear she'd repeat the mistakes I made. But all of it came from love. Love that wanted to protect. Love that didn't know how else to exist. The years went by, and affection turned into memory. Sometimes she'd call, and I'd pretend to be cheerful just to hear her voice a little longer. Even when the conversation was short, I'd stretch it out, trying to find, between the pauses, a glimpse of the girl who once called me her hero. But her voice was cold, distant, mechanical. It was like talking to someone who no longer recognized me. Little by little, I stopped waiting. I stopped planning visits, stopped making her favorite meals, stopped tidying her room, just in case she came. because waiting also tires you out. Even the purest kind of love learns to protect itself. But nothing I did filled the emptiness she left behind. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't just her absence, it was the absence of who I was when she was with me. Because being a mother isn't a role you can walk away from. Even when the child leaves, love stays behind, shouting inside you, begging to be heard. I still find myself remembering the days she would rest her head on my lap and tell me I was her best friend. Now, she barely looks at me. And when she does, it's as if she's looking at a stranger. It feels like there's an invisible wall between us, built from words unsaid, grudges stored away, and promises forgotten. Time has a cruel way of testing love. It doesn't ask if you're ready, it just changes things. And before you know it, it's too late to go back. That's how I found myself lost between what we were and what was left. I kept trying to understand, as if there were logic in any of it. But a mother's love isn't math. There's no adding, no dividing, only giving. And when what you give isn't received, your heart feels the weight of waste. Still, I couldn't stop loving her. Because a mother's love doesn't have an off switch. The distance between us became routine. The days passed, the seasons changed, and even without words, I was still there, waiting, believing, praying in silence that one day she'd look back. Because no matter how cold love grows, there's always a spark that refuses to die, a stubborn hope, the kind only a mother knows. And maybe that's why this story isn't over yet, because a mother's heart can be hurt, can be ignored, can even go hungry, but it never forgets. It keeps beating, even through the chill of abandonment. And from that chill, from that aching emptiness, comes the hardest part of my story, the part where love is tested not by distance, but by the absence of everything that once made it exist. The house became both small and enormous at the same time. Small because the walls seemed to close in on me, and enormous because the silence echoed through every corner. The clock kept ticking, but inside me, time had stopped. It was late afternoon when I realized even the smell of food was gone. Not even the coffee had its warmth anymore. The pot held only emptiness and a trace of memory. I sat at the table and stared at the clean plate, too tired to cry. When the body feels hunger, it moans. When the soul feels hunger, it falls silent. And I had been living in that silence for days. It wasn't just the lack of food. It was the lack of her, the lack of a simple gesture, a phone call, a "Mom, are you okay?" I didn't want luxury. I didn't want a feast. I just wanted to feel like I still existed for someone. Hunger of the body I could handle. I'd learned how to survive with little. But hunger of the soul, that one is cruel. It's a pain no soup or bread can heal. It's a pain that lives inside you, and the more you pretend it's gone, the more it grows. I remember opening the cupboard and seeing the shelves almost empty. The sugar was gone. The rice too. The last piece of bread had gone hard on the table. I stared at it, searching for strength. But strength doesn't come when the heart is hollow. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, God will provide. Because if I didn't say it out loud, despair would eat me alive. And the saddest part was knowing. She knew. She knew what I was going through. Knew I needed help. And still, she didn't come. It wasn't my empty stomach that hurt. It was knowing she knew and still didn't come. That sentence became a sound that lived in my mind. I repeated it without meaning to, trying to make sense of something that had none. I had raised a daughter who learned to walk with her head high, to depend on no one, to conquer the world. And in that, I succeeded. But the price I paid was too high. Love got left behind. Sometimes I sat on the porch just to watch the street, not because I was waiting for anyone, but because the sound of cars reminded me the world was still turning. Inside the house, everything was silence, the kind of silence that screams. The furniture held stories. The photos on the wall seemed to watch me. I saw her smile in every corner, and I felt the ache of missing her like a constant presence. Loneliness has a smell, a sound, a weight, and mine was the weight of a forgotten mother. The days started to blur together. I lost track of time. I woke up and went to sleep with the same emptiness. I tried to distract myself by tidying the house, washing the few clothes I had left, wiping the dust off memories. But nothing filled the space she left behind. A house without her felt like a body without a soul. Every object seemed to ask, "Where is the love that used to live here?" The cold at night was worse, not just the chill on my skin, but the cold of absence. I curled up in bed, hugging my pillow as if it could give me back the warmth of an old embrace. The sound of rain on the roof took me back to when she'd run under the covers and say, "Mom, I'm scared." Today, I'm the one who's scared. Scared of being forgotten for good. Scared that love died quietly, without a goodbye. One day, I opened the fridge, and it breathed back the icy gust of lack. Nothing but a little water and a covered pot. My body asked for food, but my heart begged for comfort. I didn't know which one to feed first. I made tea with what I had, and, as the steam rose, I thought, how many mothers are living this same thing right now? Mothers who gave everything and now wait for a phone call that never comes. If you've lived this, write in the comments, "I understand this pain," because this pain needs to be heard, needs to be spoken. As the tea cooled, a tear slipped out without warning. It was a heavy one, the kind that carries years of weariness. It wasn't just sadness, it was the feeling of being invisible. The love that once nourished me now left me empty. The same heart that once beat strong for her now beat slowly, as if tired of waiting. I looked toward the gate, imagining footsteps that never came. A mother's heart is stubborn. It always waits. We try to pretend we don't, but deep down, we always do. A phone call, a visit, any sign that love still exists. But time kept passing, and what came was silence. A dense, cruel silence that weighed more than hunger. Even so, I kept setting a plate on the table, out of habit. It was a simple gesture, almost automatic. I'd sit down, stare at the empty plate, and remember when she'd ask me to serve, "Just a little more, Mom." Now I was the one asking, not for food, but for remembrance. Hunger of the body is harsh, but it passes. Hunger of the soul doesn't leave. It settles in. It corrodes. It makes you look inward and realize that what hurts isn't what's missing from the table, but what's missing from the heart. It's a hunger time doesn't cure. It only disguises. A hunger you don't kill with bread, but with presence. I started to notice the house was losing life. The clock stopped. The curtain gathered dust. The radio no longer played. It was as if time itself had given up. I walked through the rooms and felt that every wall held a piece of a conversation that would never happen again. And in the middle of so much emptiness, loneliness became my only companion. On the outside, I looked steady. People said I was strong, that God doesn't abandon. And I believed that. But I also knew that faith doesn't fill a plate. Faith sustains, but the body still feels. And I felt it. I felt my stomach ache, my throat tighten, my heart falter a little more each day. Even so, something inside me wouldn't let me give up, because a mother doesn't give up. Even when hunger comes, even when love seems to have gone, hope remains. And that hope is what keeps the body standing and the soul breathing. I remembered what my neighbor once told me. One day, she'll remember you. I wanted to believe. That, I truly did. But each night without a sign from her made that hope tremble. I wondered if she thought about me, if she remembered my face, if the smell of my coffee still lived in any of her memories. But what hurt most was knowing that she knew. She knew about my situation, my need, my loneliness, and even so, she didn't come. That even so was what killed me a little every day. I asked myself how her heart could rest, knowing mine was crying in silence. The days stayed cold, and the house stayed empty. Loneliness made me talk to God more than ever. I didn't ask for food or material comfort. I asked for strength. Strength not to harden, not to let bitterness take the place of love. Because no matter how much it hurts, love is still what keeps me alive. And that's what people need to understand. A mother's abandonment isn't the end of love. It's the hardest test love can face. I kept living, surviving, resisting the pain that forgetting brings. Hunger of the body, I've learned how to trick. But hunger of the soul, that one remains, waiting for the day it will be fed, not by bread, but by a gesture. The gesture that hasn't come yet. The gesture I'm still waiting for. And out of that waiting, the next part of my story was born, where pain begins to turn into something else. Something I didn't even know existed until I lived through the emptiness of a house that used to be full of love. It was on a gray afternoon, the kind where the wind seems to carry memories, that she arrived. I was sitting on the porch, staring at the horizon without really seeing it, when I heard the slow sound of footsteps approaching. It was Donna Alzira, my longtime neighbor. A woman time had bent, but not broken. She carried in her eyes the kind of wisdom you don't learn from books, only from suffering. And when she saw me there, quiet, a cold cup in my hands, she didn't ask a thing. She just sat beside me and took a deep breath, like someone who already knew. For a few minutes, we stayed silent, a comfortable silence, different from the one that ruled my house, the kind of silence that holds you, that understands without needing words. After a while, she turned to me and said softly, almost in a whisper, "Daughter, God sees everything, even those who pretend not to see." I closed my eyes. That sentence pierced my chest like an arrow hitting its mark. It felt like someone had finally put into words what I'd been feeling for so long. She looked at me with the steadiness only women who have lived a lot can give. You think you're alone, but you're not. God doesn't abandon those who have loved, and He also sees those who forgot to return that love. I tried to smile, but my face wouldn't let me. The tears started to fall, and I couldn't stop them. She didn't interrupt me, didn't try to console me. She simply reached out, placed her hand over mine, and left it there, steady, as if to say, "I understand." In that simple touch, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if a piece of the hope I'd lost slowly found its way back. I realized that no matter how invisible you may feel to the world, there is always someone who sees the pain you try to hide. And she went on, in a calm voice, "The pain you feel isn't punishment. It's a seed of wisdom. And one day, the one who forgot you will remember, because God has a beautiful way of teaching, my dear. He doesn't need words, He uses time." I stayed there listening, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the urge to interrupt. Her words came heavy with truth. Each one fell into me like a slow medicine. Don't wish evil on anyone. Don't ask for justice in anger. Let God work in the silence, because the same silence that hurts you today will be your testimony tomorrow. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears. It was as if she had opened a window inside me and let the air in. She stood up, walked to the gate, and looked into my house. "You need to open that window, woman. This house smells of hoarded sorrow. Let the light in. Put on fresh coffee. Clear that table. Life isn't over." And in that moment, I realized she wasn't just talking about the house. She was talking about me. I was the house. I was the place that needed air, light, a fresh start. After she left, I stayed there, frozen in place, thinking about everything she had said. Her words echoed like a prayer. God sees everything. I repeated it under my breath like someone trying to believe again. God sees everything, even those who pretend not to see. It clung to my soul like a truth I could no longer ignore. I started looking around. The same place that once reminded me of pain now felt different. The walls were still worn, but there was something new in the air, a presence. Maybe it was faith moving back in. I went to the kitchen, took the old cloth off the table, opened the window, and let the wind in. The smell of dust mixed with the scent of hope. For the first time in a long while, I felt the urge to take a deep breath. I grabbed the kettle, boiled some water, and made coffee. As the aroma filled the room, I remembered her words. "Brew fresh coffee, clean this table." It was symbolic, but also real, because sometimes the first step to healing the soul is cleaning the space where it lives. And in that simple act, I felt something awaken inside me. When the coffee was ready, I placed an extra cup on the table, not because I expected anyone, but because I understood what she meant. It was a gesture of faith, a way of telling the universe, the table is still set and love still lives here. With every sip, I felt a strength I hadn't felt in years. As I drank, I thought about how many women like me are out there, hiding their pain behind quiet walls. Women who loved too much, who were forgotten, yet still stand. Because a woman's heart doesn't break easily. It bends, it rebuilds, it transforms. And that's what wisdom does. It turns suffering into strength. That late afternoon, the sun peeked shyly through the clouds. A ray of light came through the window and landed right on an old picture of my daughter hanging on the wall. It was as if God Himself was reminding me, there is still love here. I looked at that photo and felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, but it no longer felt the same. Now it had meaning. Donna Alzira's words wouldn't leave my mind. God sees everything. Such a simple phrase, yet so powerful. Because deep down, what hurt the most was the feeling that no one saw, no one cared. Knowing that God saw, that He had been there all along, rekindled a small but steady flame inside me. That night, I slept differently. My body still tired, but my heart lighter. For the first time in a long time, I gave thanks before closing my eyes. I thanked God for being alive, for still feeling, for still believing. And as I drifted off to sleep, I held her words close like a charm. God sees everything, even those who pretend not to. In the days that followed, I began to change little things. I put fresh flowers in the living room, washed the curtains, swept the yard. Every motion was a gesture of healing. It wasn't just cleaning, it was rebirth. Each step was my way of saying, I still exist. And the more I did, the more I realized something inside me was learning how to breathe again. The emptiness in the house was still there, but it didn't feel so cruel anymore. Because when faith returns, even silence sounds different. And it's strange how the presence of a wise woman, with simple words and a calm gaze, can change the course of an entire life. Donna Alzira might never know how deeply she saved me that afternoon, but I do. And that's why this story still needs to be told to the end, because sometimes all it takes is one sentence to awaken a sleeping soul. A sentence said at just the right time, one that reaches where even time couldn't. And that sentence, God sees everything, even those who pretend not to, was the beginning of something new within me. The quiet rebirth of a woman who, even wounded, still believes that love and faith can heal what abandonment tried to destroy. But healing doesn't happen fast. It begins slowly, between memories and scars. And it's on that path that the next part of my story starts to take shape, where the silence of pain begins to turn into the voice of faith. After that encounter with Donna Alzira, something began to shift within me. What I didn't realize, though, was that life itself was also moving, quietly, outside my walls. God's justice is silent but certain. It doesn't come with noise or warning. It simply happens, at the right time, in the right way. And that's what I came to see with my own eyes. I never wished harm. Not once. I just placed it in God's hands. Because there comes a point when you understand that some pains aren't meant for revenge. They're meant to teach. Days passed, and the faith that had been rekindled in me brought a strange calm. I no longer expected, demanded, or questioned. I just lived, one day at a time, believing that the same God who saw my silence also saw her heart. And He did, because one day life began to show that no one escapes what they plant. I heard through others that things weren't going well for my daughter. Her marriage, the one she defended so fiercely, the one that had helped drive us apart, was crumbling. The happy pictures on social media disappeared. The forced smiles vanished, and the glow she once carried had faded. At first, I didn't know what to feel. Part of me ached for her pain. Another part simply understood. Life was returning to her what she had refused to see. It wasn't punishment. It was a lesson. Sometimes life has to bring you to your knees to teach you to look up, and I knew that's what was happening to her. The same daughter who once left me hungry was now feeling the emptiness of having no one to lean on. The same woman who once looked at me with indifference was now tasting the bitterness of loneliness. I didn't celebrate it, but I didn't cry either. I just watched, quietly, as God worked. One day, a neighbor who knew my daughter approached me and said, "She's not doing well, you know? Seems like she's lost her way." I listened, but didn't respond. I only thought, God, do what needs to be done, but don't let my daughter be lost. I didn't have the strength to interfere anymore, nor the right to step into her life, but my mother's heart never stopped praying. And maybe that's what people don't understand. A wounded mother's love doesn't die. It just learns to pray from afar. With time, more news came. She lost her job, had to leave her home, and began relying on help from friends. The independent, proud woman who had once pushed me away was now learning what it felt like to depend on others. And there's no lesson more powerful than feeling in your own skin the pain you once caused. I knew what she felt because I had lived it. The hunger of the soul, the emptiness, the ache of needing and having no one to turn to. But even knowing all that, I didn't feel revenge. I felt compassion. Because when God teaches, He doesn't humiliate, He shapes. And that's what He was doing with her, shaping her heart. She needed to learn the value of what she had once taken for granted. And for that, the path was the same as mine. Silence. I kept my simple routine. I woke up early, swept the porch, made my coffee, and watched the sunrise with gratitude. Some days, the wind would carry her memory back to me, as if time itself whispered her name in my ear, and I'd murmur softly, "She's in your hands, Lord. I've done all I could." That sentence became my daily prayer, because you learn that some battles aren't yours, they're God's. One afternoon, as I tended my plants, I heard someone knock at the gate. My heart raced. For a second I thought it might be her. But it wasn't. It was an old friend, bringing unexpected news. She told me my daughter had started going to church, attending services, and asking for prayers for her family. When I heard that, my throat tightened, because I realized that, even without a word from me, my prayers had found their way to her. God works in silence, but His reach is endless. What once seemed impossible had begun to happen. Slowly, she was being broken, not destroyed, but broken in the way clay must be before it's reshaped. And that's how grace works. First it breaks pride, then it rebuilds the heart. I remembered Donna Alzira's words, "God sees everything," and I smiled to myself, because He truly does. He had seen every tear I shed in that kitchen, every night I went to bed with an empty stomach, every time I swallowed my pride just to keep from drowning in anger. He saw it all, and now He was showing me that no pain had been in vain. Months went by, and with them came new signs. My daughter started sending me short messages, no declarations, just small gestures. "Hi, Mom. You doing okay? I miss you." Simple words, but to me they sounded like miracles. I answered calmly, without pressure, only with love. Because when God begins to move, you learn not to get in the way. Each hi she sent was like a crack opening in the wall between us. Step by step, I saw God's justice at work, not as punishment, but as correction. His justice doesn't destroy, it restores. I understood that for her to come back, pride had to die first, and that process is painful, but necessary. Some days I still caught myself remembering everything I'd lived, the hunger, the abandonment, the silence. And even then, my heart didn't hold a grudge. It held wisdom, because I finally understood that forgiveness isn't a gift for the other person. It's freedom for us. When you place it in God's hands, your soul rests. And that's exactly what I did. One night while I was praying, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was as if someone laid a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "It's all right now." And I knew it was Him, because the same God who saw my pain was now showing me the reward of patience. I learned that waiting in silence is the strongest act of faith. With every bit of news, I saw more proof of God's invisible hand. He hadn't failed me. He had only waited for the right moment to act. And when He acts, nothing is by accident. My daughter needed to learn the value of what she'd lost, and I needed to learn how to love without needing to control. Today, when I look back, I see that everything I went through was a refining process. Pain broke me, but it also healed me. It taught me to trust in something greater, to understand that divine justice isn't revenge, it's balance. God's timing doesn't fail, and what is right always finds its way back. I didn't know when or how, but something in me said she would return, and when she did, I would be ready, not to charge her or confront her, but to receive her. Because a mother who lays her pain in God's hands doesn't need explanations. She only needs peace. God's justice doesn't need an audience. It happens in life's backstage, where no one sees. And when it happens, you can't deny it. He moves the invisible, changes the improbable, and turns what seemed lost into a miracle. And that miracle began to grow quietly in my story. But a miracle doesn't show itself all at once. It arrives in pieces, in small things, in signs only the heart understands. And on that path of faith, between wounds and new beginnings, the next chapter of my life began to unfold. The moment when God's hand not only brought justice, but prepared me for a reunion that would change everything. It was a heavy skied afternoon, the kind that announces change. I was in the kitchen stirring the coffee when I heard the gate. My heart stopped for a second. It was a sound I'd recognize even after years. Light steps, hesitant, dragged by regret. When I looked out the window, I saw her shadow before I saw her face, and it felt as if time had stopped, as if every memory I had kept in silence rushed back all at once. She stood there at the door, eyes brimming, wearing the look of someone who finally understands what it cost to arrive at that moment. I didn't say a word, I just looked at her, and in that look was everything words could never hold. Pain, love, absence, fear, longing, forgiveness, all of it pulsing between us. For a moment, the silence spoke louder than any sentence. She tried to smile, but the tears came first, and when I saw a tear roll down her face, I felt my own pain loosen, as if each drop washed a little of what had stayed stuck in the past. She took one step forward, then another, and before I knew it, she was holding me. That embrace, it was the longest of my life. The embrace of a daughter who finally returned, and of a mother who never stopped waiting. I closed my eyes and let time bend there. Between us, there was no space for guilt or demands, only love, bare, simple, stripped of pride. Love that had survived everything, hunger, distance, silence. She whispered something, her voice trembling, almost childlike. "Mom, forgive me." I held her face in my hands, looked straight into her eyes, and said, "I never stopped forgiving you, my daughter." Because it was true. I had forgiven her long before she asked. I forgave her on the cold nights, in solitary prayers, in the memories that cradled me when the pain felt unbearable. Forgiveness had lived in me for a long time. It only needed her to arrive and find it. We stayed like that for a few minutes, just enough time for two souls to recognize each other again. I could feel her heart pounding against my chest. It was the sound of life beginning again, the sound of a wound being healed. When she pulled back a little, I saw in her eyes the reflection of real remorse, the kind that doesn't need to be said, only felt. She looked around, as if recognizing a place that was no longer the same, and whispered, "It looks different here, Mom." I smiled. So do I. And it was true. Pain had changed me, but it hadn't hardened me. Loneliness taught me to be calmer, stronger, more whole. And standing there with her, I realized that all the waiting had meaning. She wanted to explain, to tell me why, to justify what she'd done, but I stopped her with a gesture. "You don't need to, my girl. It's over now." Because true love doesn't need justification. It only needs presence. And in that moment, her presence was everything. The rest, the past, the emptiness, all of it lost its importance. She started to cry again, and I let her. Every tear was a piece of guilt leaving. I cried too, but mine was a different cry. Gratitude. The cry of someone watching a promise being kept. Because long ago, when I laid everything before God, I asked for just one thing, that He bring my daughter back to me. And there she was, back, alive. Broken, but with a heart ready to begin again. Time has a mysterious way of setting things right. I realized that forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It transforms it. And when we forgive, it's not because we forgot. It's because we finally understand that love is greater than the mistake. I loved that girl, even when she hurt me, even when she left me hungry, even when she pretended I didn't exist. The love remained, firm and unshakable, like the roots of an old tree. As she spoke, I just listened. And deep down, I knew that moment wasn't about who was wrong. It was about who endured. It was about God keeping His promise, His justice showing itself not through pain, but through healing. It was the end of hunger, not the hunger of the body, but the hunger for love, forgiveness, and belonging. Between sobs, she told me everything she'd been through, the hardships, the losses, the sleepless nights, the remorse. Every word mirrored something I had lived myself, and it was impossible not to see that God had led us down the same road, just at different times. He taught me to wait, and He taught her the value of return. I listened in silence, as if receiving a confession. When she finished, I said only, Now you understand, my child, what it's like to feel hunger of the soul. She nodded, eyes red, and that simple gesture was the answer I had waited for so long. I didn't need anything else. No excuses, no promises. That look was enough. I took her hands and held them tightly. You came back, and that's all that matters. She cried again, and I let her tears wash away what was left of her guilt. I let my own tears fall too, because sometimes you need to cry for your heart to breathe again. She asked if she could help in the kitchen, and I let her. Every movement she made there, surrounded by familiar pots and comforting scents, felt like time rewinding. She wasn't a child anymore, but she was my girl, repentant, humble, ready to rebuild. I saw in her hands the same gestures as before, the same care she once learned from me. And inside, something whispered, "The lesson has been learned." As she stirred the spoon, she said quietly, "Mom, now I understand what it's like to miss someone who was always there." That pierced me deeply. And unable to hold back what I felt, I replied, "Love never leaves, my daughter. It just waits for the right moment to be remembered." The smell of coffee once again filled the house. The same aroma that once brought me comfort now brought peace. The table that had once symbolized loneliness now carried the sound of life again. She placed 2 cups in front of us, and I realized her gesture mirrored mine from the day I made coffee for no one. But this time, there was someone. There was us. We sat there, drinking slowly, in silence. And in that silence, forgiveness finally completed its work. There were no speeches, no promises, only presence. 2 women, mother and daughter, rebuilding what time had tried to destroy. When I looked at her, I saw more than remorse. I saw growth. I saw a woman who had finally learned what real love is, the kind that doesn't demand, doesn't boast, doesn't need to prove itself, the love that simply is. Inside me, I felt a deep, unexplainable peace. It was as if God whispered, "See, I told you I would." And he did. Not my way, not in my time, but in his, perfect, complete, redemptive. The hunger that once consumed me had turned into forgiveness that nourished. I realized that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to live trapped in what hurt you. It means giving love the chance to breathe again. And in that moment, without needing more words, I understood. The love that survived the pain was the same love that now healed me. And my daughter, the same one who once left me hungry, was now feeding on the forgiveness I had saved for her. But the story doesn't end here, because when God decides to restore, he doesn't give back what was lost. He makes it new. And what was about to happen after that reunion was living proof that even the deepest wounds can bloom when the heart learns to forgive. The smell of simple food filled the air, and the sound of cutlery against plates felt like music after so much silence. She and I, sitting face to face, as if life had handed us back a piece of what we'd lost. The table was the same, but now it held a different meaning. It wasn't a place of emptiness anymore. It was an altar of renewal. I looked at my daughter and saw her face, tired, yet light, like someone who finally found rest after a long road. She served my plate with care, a small gesture that said everything. It was her way of saying, "I remember, I've learned, I love you." As we ate, the sound of rain outside blended with our memories, and I thought about how life moves in cycles. Once, I was the one who taught her how to eat, how to walk, how to pray. Now, she looked at me with the eyes of someone learning anew. Life has these turns that only love understands, and love is what always wins. I took her hand and felt the warmth I'd been missing for so long. The pain that had once withered me now turned into gratitude. I learned that forgiveness isn't a favor you give. It's nourishment. It feeds the soul, strengthens the spirit, and heals even what once seemed impossible. Hunger taught me that the sweetest bread is the bread of reconciliation, because when the soul is fed by forgiveness, the heart never goes hungry again. We stayed there, unhurried. Every bite was a memory returning to its place. Every glance exchanged was a silent promise of love, without demand, without debt. And for the first time in a long while, the house sounded alive again, a sound not born from words, but from simply being together. Forgiveness filled what absence had left behind. Not like an instant miracle, but like a sunrise, slow, beautiful, inevitable. And in that dawn, I realized that God's justice never fails. It only waits for the heart to be ready to receive what is true. Now all that remained was peace, a peace that no longer depended on explanations, only on presence. Because sometimes the greatest miracle love can perform is bringing back together two people who once lost each other. And if this story touched your heart, know that every story I tell here in the Matriarch's Secrets carries a new lesson, a new form of healing, a new way to see love, pain, and forgiveness. So stay here with me and watch the next video that's appearing on your screen. It holds another powerful story, with the same soul, the same truth, and the same strength that turns wounds into wisdom. The Matriarch's Secrets. Every woman carries a secret. Every story holds a lesson.